Good evening, everyone. We continue our study in the book of First Kings. We ended last week in verse 19. And just for a quick recap, this was a time when Adoniah or Adoniyahu asked Bathsheba to go to King Solomon and ask for the hand of Avishag. And now you remember Avishag was the, well, I would say the lap warmer, the girl who was warming up the body of King David as he was getting very old. And for whatever it's worth, we now get to understand that Avishag is part and parcel of the palace. And the interest of Adoniah was to have the hand of Avishag in marriage and thereby being linked to the palace. And so in verse 19, Bathsheba went to King Solomon, and King Solomon uh, showed his respect for Bathsheba. Understand still that we haven't done this topic yet, that King Solomon is actually a very young man and showed his respect for Bathsheba. We will deal with this tomorrow with the age of King Solomon. But for today, just bear in mind that King Solomon is very young, showed respect to Bathsheba, and bowed and showed that kind of a respect that the mother is important, and also to allow her to sit on his right. Now, this whole aspect of allowing the king's mother to sit on his right hand demonstrate how important Bathsheba is to King Solomon. We begin today with verse 20. After all that was said, Bathsheba started to make the request, and this is an and then. So just understand that after Bathsheba is now seated on the right hand of King Solomon, she said this. It says, I have a small request, something to ask of you. And so do not refuse me. Understand, we have seen this before. The word refuse here is to return. No, this is the Hebrew way of speaking, that when Bathsheba is making a petition, asking a request, so that the request doesn't come back to her like a boomerang, that would mean that that would have been denied. Now we see the king said to her, ask my mother, for I will not return to you, or return. This word is return to your face. And this is a, well, I guess, figurative of a denial, right? So that the request will not be denied. Now, this is a very standard way of speaking. And King Solomon, being king, having the mother ask him for something, obviously, in the initial stages, the king would not ever imagine that there would be something that the king might say no to. After all, it is the mother who is asking, and she is given the importance of sitting at his right hand. Verse 21 then begins to show us what Bathsheba was trying to ask. And so this would be an and then, or and so. He says, let Avishag the Shunammite be given to Adoniah, your brother, as a wife. Now, understand this, wife means woman. The English husband and wife doesn't appear in the Hebrew. It is very much like, say, ancient Chinese, where the husband is called the man of the woman. The wife would be the woman of the man. And so they use generic terminology like man and woman. And so this would be to give Avishag to Adoniah, your brother, as to women. Now, two women or four women or for a woman or four would be for a wife. Now, that would be a right way of translating it. Observe in verse 22. Immediately, and then King Solomon answered and said to his mother, why are you requesting Avishag the Shunammite for Adoniah? Then comes this kind of I would say a retort. Request for him the kingdom as well, since he's my older brother, for him, for Aviatar the priest, and for Joab the son of Zeruiah. What does David mean? What does Solomon actually mean? If you understand the tone of verse 22, you'd find that King Solomon is very angry, very frustrated, and very disappointed. And so he starts by saying this, why are you requesting Avishag for Adoniah? Why are you representing Adoniah to ask for Avishag as wife? Now, we may not understand the implication is that this particular statement is to allow Adoniah the right to the palace. The connection between Adoniah and the palace would be even closer. And so the retort comes this way. Why don't you ask, right? Ask for him the kingdom. And this is the Davidic kingdom. Ask for the kingdom. He is my older brother. Maybe you could say that, no, since he's older, you should step down and give Adoniah the kingdom. Not only for Adoniah, you can ask for Aviatar and for Joab, because these three plotted to stop Solomon. And so this is a problem. This is a problem. So verse 23 then says this, then, and this would be and then after Solomon said all these things, Solomon made an oath by the Lord, means he swore by the Lord or by the name of Jehovah. And this is serious. In fact, it is very serious, because anyone who makes an oath in the name of Jehovah had better deliver on that oath, or else don't swear on it. And this is what Solomon said, may God do to me, and more so, and even worse, if Adoniah has not spoken this word against his own life. This literally tells us that Solomon is going to retaliate. Okay, retaliate. It has been peaceful until now, until Adoniah made his first move to come close to Solomon and the kingdom and the palace by offering to marry Avishag. And in that sense, Solomon is very wise. He can sense the move of another potential plot. And so when we read these texts, we need to bear in mind of the first plot that failed, and now a second plot is being devised. Verse 24, it says, as the Lord lives, it is God who has established me and set me on the throne of David, my father. Now, the word establish means to make firm or make secure. Now, this is a very important statement. He caused to arrange for this to happen. And so you would have Benaiah, you would have Nathan the prophet, and he was anointed, and all the right things were done so that there is no ambiguity that King Solomon is really the one designated for the throne. And so he has made me a house just as he promised, God promised. And this is the house. The house is via David to Solomon, and then through his descendants. And this is the confirmation that this is a divine appointment. Now, of course, we are not told in so many words, but Adoniah was plotting against, going against this divine appointment. And so Adoniah certainly shall be put to death today. That today Adoniah shall, how should we say, shall die. And in this case, prematurely. Now, prematurely means he's not going to live till a ripe old age and die naturally. So he shall be put to death. And this is a correct way of expressing. Verse 25. Right after saying this, verse 25, and then after saying that Adoniah should be put to death, then King Solomon sent by Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, and he struck him so that he died. Now, this word struck him, actually, how should we say? You could say strike, to meet him, to strike him, I think to meet him, and by meeting him, to cause him, how should I say, to meet him, and then he killed him, right? He killed him. So this would be to meet him and to kill him. So there are two actions here, but actually this word can mean strike as well. And so this would be a way of expressing the premature death of Adoniah. And the premature death is to be killed or executed. Now, understand this is a royal decision. And as a royal decision, he is king. He can do anything he wants. Just like Saul decided that he was going to pursue David, Solomon decides that this is the right thing to do to terminate all opportunities and all opportunists like Adoniah, who tries to turn around God's divine appointment for the throne. Verse 26. In verse 26, the next person that Solomon was going to deal with was Abiathar, the priest. And the king said to Abiathar, says, go to Anathoth, your own field. You actually deserve to die. Why? Because he was part of the plot, right? The original plot. But we find that Solomon didn't do that. So, but I will not put you to death at this time. I am not going to kill you right now. He's going to spare Abiathar because you have carried the ark of the Lord God before my father David, and because you are afflicted in everything with which my father was afflicted. And in the wisdom of Solomon, there was favor extended to Abiathar. Why the favor? It was because, number one, he actually did carry the ark of God. And it was all during David's time. And he was afflicted, meaning he experienced all the challenges that David went through. And so because of this, he had stood by David and served God faithfully until this point in time of the plot. And so I'm going to spare your life. So Solomon dismissed Abiathar from being priest to the Lord to fulfill the word of the Lord which he had spoken regarding the house of Eli in Shiloh. Now this would be in 1 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 32 and 35. That it was said in passing that Eli will see a rival in the temple of God, right? In my house. But at that point in time, there was no temple, there was only the tabernacle. But this was a prophecy that's going to be said later down the road that the descendant of Eli will not be priests in the house of God. And at this point in time, the temple was not built yet, was not yet built. And by this, Abiathar was dismissed. Now, the word dismissed in verse 27, I think you would find that it's interesting. This is to drive out. In modern day terms, I think you would think of this as Solomon fired Abiathar from being the priest. And this happens to fulfill the prophecy here. In verse 28, then the news came to Joab because Joab had followed Adoniah, though he had not followed Avshalom. Joab was very much on David's side during the highly challenged period of Avshalom. But when it came to Adoniah, Joab stood at Adoniah's side so that he could be having an opportunity to be spared from all the things that he had done in the earlier work. And so Joab fled to the tent of the Lord in verse 28. And then he took hold of the horns of the altar, as if like Adoniah, to seek God's, I would say, to seek God's protection, to seek God's defense, in hope that Solomon would not kill him. Verse 29. Verse 29 says, after this particular incident, and then it was reported to King Solomon that Joab had fled the tent of the Lord and was beside the altar, hanging on to the horns of the altar. And, and then Solomon sent Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, says, go execute him. In verse 29, the word execute him is the same word for Adoniah. It is to meet, to strike him. And thereby, you can say that this is to put to death. And this was how Joab died. In verse 30, it says, and then Benaiah came to the tent of the Lord and said to him, this is what the king has said, come out. Now this would be in the Gibeon, where the altar was, so that he can hang on to that. And the tent of the Lord, that would be the tabernacle, was there. And there was nothing inside. The Ark of the Covenant wasn't there. The Ark of the Covenant was moved from Kiryat Yearim to the city of David. And David had put a covering or a tent over that. And so Benaiah came and called Joab out. And so Joab says, no, I will die here. And Benaiah brought back the word to the king, saying, this is what Joab spoke. And so he answered me, because Benaiah cannot go in and seek him out. And verse 31, and the king said to Benaiah, do just as he has spoken, execute him and bury him, so that you may remove from me and from my father's house the blood which Joab shed without justification. And the idea of without justification means shed innocently. It wasn't during wartime, it was during peacetime, and they were killed. So we read this in chapter 1, and these were words that King David had left with Solomon. Verse 32, the Lord will return his blood to his own head because he struck two men who were more righteous and better than he. And this is important for us to understand that there is a repercussion, and this was a delayed judgment. It wasn't done during the time of David. And in chapter 1, David says, please do that somehow, sometime in your reign. And so in verse 32 of chapter 2, it was carried out. And so, kill them with the sword, while my father did not know about it. And this is Abner, the son of Ner, and Amasa, the son of Yether. And these were the two lives that Joab had killed. There was no repercussion for the life of Absalom, because that was a clear royal decree. Verse 33, and then their blood shall return on the head of Joab and on the head of his descendants forever. What this really means is that whatever was spilled by Joab would seem to be a repercussion that will come and haunt them. And for David and his descendants and his house forever, and his throne, may there be peace from the Lord forever. So peace from God and a blood to Joab. So these would be the repercussion. The consequence of what Joab did will always come back on the head of Joab, right? and his seed forever, meaning whatever has happened of what Joab has done, the consequences will be seen in the following generations. But for David, then may God's peace be on his house and his seed and his throne. And this would be the shalom, right? The peace here is the shalom. And so after saying all these in verse 34, and then Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, went up and struck him and put him to death. Now, this is the same expression as in Adoniah. And then he was buried at his own house in the wilderness. So there was proper burial, respect for the man. Verse 35, and then the king appointed Benaiah. Now, this word appointed is to give. And by giving, it will be giving authority. And so the English word appoint can come into play. The son of Jehoiada over the army in his place. And then the king also appointed Zadok, the priest, in place of Abiathar. And now we have clearly Zadok and Jehoiada as the right hand and left hand of King Solomon. We have one more character to be dealt with, and this character would be Shimei. In verse 36, now would be and then. The king sent men to call Shimei and said to him, build yourself a house in Jerusalem and live there, and do not leave there for any other place. You would find that this would be a favor that was extended, but he is in a way incarcerated. And you can say that this is similar to the cities of refuge. The principle is the same. In the cities of refuge that God instructed Israel to have 3 in the western shore and 6 on the western shore and 3 on the eastern shore, anyone who had accidentally killed another person can run to the cities of refuge and stay there until the priest dies, but he cannot leave. And so there is a consequence for even accidental killing. So that when a life is taken, there is a judgment and justice must be served. And in this principle of the cities of refuge, the person who had accidentally killed can stay there freely, but he cannot leave. The moment he leaves, then the family members of the one who has been killed is allowed to kill this man. And so he says here, build yourself a house in Jerusalem. And so Jerusalem became the city of refuge for Shimei. And you live there, but you do not leave Jerusalem to go anywhere else. Now, in verse 37, the clarity is given that for on the day you leave means you go out. Go out where? You go out of Jerusalem. And then you pass the brook Kidron. This is to pass. And the brook Kidron, how should we say? If this was Jerusalem, this would be the Mount of Olives. And this would be east. And this would be Jerusalem. And this would be Kidron. And down in the valley, there would be a little river, a brook. And so it was important for Shimei not to cross the brook, and this would be the dividing line. And so he cannot leave Jerusalem, and the surrounding would be the Kidron Valley. And so Solomon says, if you do that, you will know for certain you will die. Your blood will be on your own head. It's your fault. It's your fault that you die. I am giving you a concept of a refuge, but you leave it and you disobey, you die. Verse 38, Shimei then said to the king, the word is good. The word, this judgment is good. Good in the eyes of Shimei. Why? Because the idea of good and evil is always in the eyes of the beholder. And so in the eyes of Shimei, he doesn't have to die. And since he doesn't have to die, it's good. It's good. So just as my lord the king has spoken, let it be, so your servant shall do. And so Shimei lived in Jerusalem for many days. So for many days means long time, right? Long time. So in a sense, you can say that he is free, but technically speaking, he is incarcerated, that he can't leave Jerusalem. It's like a sort of a house arrest concept. Verse 39. But it came about at the end of 3 years. And so a long time here is 3 years. That two of Shimei's servants ran away to Achish, son of Maacah, the king of Gath. Now, where would that be? You find if this was Jerusalem, Gath would be here. And so we have two servants of Shimei ran off. And it was told to Shimei, says, yo, your servants are in Gath. Now understand that Gath is not in Jerusalem. Gath is quite far away from Jerusalem. In verse 40, this would be, and then after hearing this, Shimei got very upset. And I guess you can say his emotions overtook him. He got up and he saddled his donkey. This is and then, right? He has to first get up and then he saddled his donkey. Now, all of this is what we call a narrative. You can actually see the video in your head. And then he went to Gath. See, he has to get up, saddle, and then go to Gath. And then go to Achish. And he was searching for his servants. And then Shimei, right? And then Shimei went and brought his servants back from Gath. This whole idea is to cause, right? This word brought is to cause them to come back. And this would be to Jerusalem. So he left, went to God, and brought them back. That would be verse 40. Now in verse 41, you can see the royal judgment. And then always understand that in the narrative, Solomon cannot make a judgment on Shimei unless Shimei has actually done it and it has become a fact. And so it was reported to Solomon that Shimei had gone from Jerusalem to Gath and then he had returned. And so the report was him went to God, came back. What is the consequence of this? Is because he had exceeded. This is Kidron, which means that you have left exactly the same distance. You have left the boundaries of Jerusalem. Now, in verse 42, and then understand this, we are now still in the narrative, and then the king sent. Now, whenever you see the word send, is to send men, the servants, to represent Solomon, and called Shimei, summoned, called him, and said to him, did I not make you swear by the Lord and solemnly warn you, saying, know for certain that on the day you go out and go anywhere, you shall assuredly die. And you said to me, the word I have heard is good. Now understand this. It is the king, he sends, and this would be his servants, and to call and summon Shimei, and then said to him. Now it's important for us to know this, that when the king sent for Shimei and called Shimei to bring Shimei to see the king, and the king reminded, this was the agreement, or what we would call today the terms of freedom, that he doesn't die that day. The question was, why then have you not kept the oath of the Lord and the command which I imposed on you, and the command which I commanded you? See, this is a play of word. So English doesn't like to repeat the word command twice, and so they use the word impose to put on to Shimei, or to have charged you. Now, in verse 44 would be the judgment, right? This is the judgment. What is important is that the king, King Solomon, as he is king, he says what he means, and means what he says. It's very much like God, that the word of the king must be faithful and must be true and truthful. And especially so when the king made the oath in the name of God. And so in verse 44, this what also is, and then the king said to Shimei, you yourself know all the evil that you acknowledge in your heart. The word acknowledge is that you know, right? That you know in your heart. That you know inside yourself, right? In your mind. You know what decisions you have made, what actions you have done, and we call it evil. Evil means this is evil in the eyes of the person that you have done to. And what would this evil be? It would be in the eyes of David. Because on the way out of Jerusalem, Shimei had cursed David, scolded David, but David did not retaliate. It was a time when David was at his lowest, with Absalom taking over and usurping the authority of the throne. And therefore, the Lord will return your evil on your head. Now, this idea will return is something we need to understand. The word here to return means to cause to give back. And so this word is probably what we would say in the present day commensurate. Although we see this word used in job applications, your pay will commensurate with your experience. This word here, return, means whatever you have done, God will repay back. And so this would be the judgment of your evil, whatever you have done to David on your own head, because this is your own fault. Nobody made you do it, but you did it on your own. You will be repaid. And this is the word return, right? Repay. And the idea here is that the justice of God will not exceed what he has done. And cursing the king is actually a capital punishment. I think even till today, when somebody goes and curse the king, uh, there will be serious repercussions. But of course, over time, when the royalty had lost their power, then that's a different idea. But you find that in those days, the king is absolute. As you recall what I had suggested to you, the king is also called Elohim, the mighty one, because he has the power to give life and to take life. He has the power to allow a person to live or execute a person to death. And in this case, Solomon is executing judgment upon Shimei. In the last two verses, which we have come to the end of chapter 2, it says here, and King Solomon will be blessed, and the throne of David will be established before the Lord forever. Understand this, that Shimei may have said all the evil about David, but he has also said good. All right, about good, about the throne of David. And these things that Shimei said is not punishable. But this was said on the way back to Jerusalem, where David crossed the Jordan and was on the way home to the city of David. And Shimei met up with David. And so, yes, Shimei did something good at the end, but for whatever he has done, it has to be paid for. And so the divine judgment for someone who has done such grievous crimes against the king or the throne of God, that God's anointed, I guess you can say this, is worthy of death. And so this was what Solomon was saying. There is no reason to kill Shimei because of the good things he had said, but of the things that he had said to David was the problem. This is justice. Verse 46. So the king commanded Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada. He went out, struck him so that he died. And the kingdom was established in the hands of Solomon. The word established here is to be made firm. Be made firm means to be made secure. No more threats. And so what we have seen in the last so many verses is that all the remaining threats that was from David's time is settled. It took quite a number of years to do this, but it's all settled. And I think in closing, I just want to say this point. While we see that Shimei was executed for the evil that he did against David, Shimei is not executed for the good that he has said about David in the blessing. And in so doing, you find that there is no such thing called the good that you do will negate the bad that you do. The evil and the good is actually not weighed in the eyes of God. When somebody has really done something that is grievous, of a crime that deserves capital punishment, the nice things that he said about the king does not negate the punishment. This is justice, which means this: when somebody kills another person and says, I am sorry and may God bless you, does not negate the fact that the judgment has to be carried out because a life was taken. So the crime, the original crime, has to be viewed in its own context and the judgment being made in its original context. Whatever was subsequently done is weighed in its own context, but a good cannot negate punishment. And so this is what we call divine justice. And we see Solomon being very wise in carrying out such judgments and punishments. And at the end of chapter 2, then the kingdom is established in his hands. It is now very firm, very secure. All the threats against the throne has been dealt with. And over the course of the past few years, every single one who attended to David, his father, became a threat to Solomon, has now been judged and judged righteously. And so we now know that at the end of chapter 2, King Solomon is really a wise king. And tomorrow we shall attempt to answer how old then is Solomon when we keep saying that he's a young man, a young man. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.